When you think about the Mag 7, let's say Apple in particular is an example, right? Are you preparing for that scenario Kayleigh outlined, which is the onshoring of jobs in this country? Or is this more about pricing in, modelling a fundamental change in how the world does trade, effectively?
I think everything is on the table at the moment. I mean, one of the things that Kayleigh was talking about with regards to having a lot of those other jobs that go into making the parts starting to move to the US. I mean, one of the clear impacts of that is the US has got much higher wages than parts of Asia. So you would be looking at significant increase in cost pressures for these companies for the Mag 7, impact on their margins and therefore on their earnings growth potential. So there are so many offsets of this that it makes it quite difficult to even fathom that you could see this complete alteration and change in the way that I think the world has got accustomed to thinking about trade and products. But this is all encompassing. Of course, it's not just technology. This is about every single product that you think through. Because of global trade, every single part will have elements of different countries about them. Okay. And shifting it back to the US is simply very inflationary.
I want to show the earnings calendar for the Mag 7, and those names that have asterisks next to them are still tentative, right? They haven't confirmed the date. But there is a split in the market I see this morning. Many believe that we won't see a bottom in equity markets until we have earnings calls and a revision to guidance that's been given or a complete removal of guidance. Others say that earnings and guidance is not important. All we need is a strong, positive piece of political news. Where do you stand, Seema?
I think we need one or the other. Either one would be important. I think probably the most important would be if the administration walks back from tariffs very significantly. Then you would see the market sentiment improving, and I think you'd see markets start to rally. Probably not a very sharp rally because I think some fundamental damage has been done here, but certainly a rally. In terms of earnings guidance, I think one of the things that we're waiting to see is that, look, if recession really is on the cards, we need to see a more realistic earnings outlook for companies across all sectors, including technology. And it's only once you have that realistic forecast, when you have got that forward guidance, talking through what the impact of tariffs in this new global environment is, only then can you start to think about where the floor is. And then once you know where the floor is, then you can start thinking forward.
Why then are people buying if we're not sure where the floor is at the moment, Seema? Why is Apple in the green, for example?
Well, I think one of the things that we've been seeing for Mag 7 has been really interesting for us is, I mean, from an asset allocation portfolio perspective, we have been trying to move away from the tactical. It's very difficult to be tactical when there's such an uncertain environment. So you almost go back to your strategic positioning. From a strategic perspective, we still like big tech if you're looking out over a 5-10 year horizon. Certainly the outlook has deteriorated even on a long-term horizon, but it's still fairly important from a global or a US growth perspective. The other part of this is that typically in this kind of environment, when there is uncertainty, when there are fears about what's going to happen to economic growth, you want companies which have got the big balance sheets, the positive cash flow, the fairly large moats around them. And the Mag 7 does still come into play. And you've already seen a very significant valuation re-rating in the past couple of months, which means that at least the Mag 7, the big tech companies, are a little bit ahead of the game in terms of having a slightly more realistic picture attached to them.
It has to be said, Apple having its worst four-day sell-off since the year 2000, many saying from an RSI perspective, relative strength index, it was oversold. This must be the point at which you pick up some of these shares. But Seema, who are the investor base right now who are willing to buy into big tech? You yourself sat in London. Are international buyers still coming in? Are we seeing it more from long-only funds in the United States, for example?
I think we have seen some retail investors starting to dip their feet in them. They really believe in the brand's perspective. So I think that's where you're seeing a bit of a dip buying. But as I said, the other thing to consider is that once you do start to see, if we see some positive headlines coming through, which can be sustained, again, these are the companies which have got that long-term earnings potential. So I think people have got an eye on the idea that there could be a walk back at any time. It may not come, but certainly it could happen at any moment. So people do still want to have exposure to these companies that can potentially ride out what would, most likely be still a challenging economic environment for the coming months.
There's this note from Bank of America out this morning that says a US-built iPhone could cost 90% more than it currently does. But that is a goal of this administration, right? Bring jobs, manufacturing jobs in tech back to the United States or to the United States for the first time. Is there any upside or sort of silver lining or bright outcome that you see with this tariffs process?
I'm not sure if there's well, look, I think over a long-term perspective, a 4 or 5 year period, then maybe, yes, there could be some positive. You would have maybe a US economy which is a bit stronger. You have a manufacturing base which is more formidable. You have less reliance on external partners. So that would be the positive, but it really comes through in the long side. It's really in the short term that you start to see this additional pain coming through. So I think it's challenging to see some really good positive news coming through. I guess the one thing is, though, is that, to that point where an iPhone could be significantly more expensive, that inflation pressure just puts upward pressure on the long end of the yield curve. We're already being seeing that playing out in the last couple of days. And from our perspective, that may be the pressure point from the Trump administration. They have repeatedly talked about their focus on Treasury yields. So maybe this is what necessarily pushes them back from the edge. And you could see some negotiations coming through in the next couple of days.